start like light or just get right into it?
I'm fine either way.
I was gonna ask you, what do you think the role of tradition is in culture making?
Okay, so get right into it is. That's a really interesting question. Because I think the first place that my mind goes to is just the way traditions form, the way things happen is so kind of strange to me. Like what gets adopted and becomes part of a tradition and versus other things that just happen once. It's just like, okay, that was a good time. Moving on.
Never do that again.
And I think so I'm not answering the question directly yet. Still thinking about it. But
maybe over the whole length of the episode.
I guess that could be one of the big overarching questions because wow, there's a lot to grapple with.
Yeah.
But so I live in a community with what we would at least self-describe as a lot of culture. And one of the things that comes to mind is we invented this game earlier this year called Hall Ball.
Okay.
And for the uninitiated, Hall Ball consists of, two teams of 3 people each, or third people each. They stand at opposite ends of a hallway, and it's kind of like a combination of cricket, rugby, generally just tackling people. And basically the aim of the game is to hit the ball and then run, and then for the player to hit who hit the ball to make it to the other end of the hallway. The players on that player team support them by pushing them that way and by tackling the people trying to stop that player. The players not on that person's team try and stop that player or tackle the people trying to stop them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the way this game started is one night, I'm not even actually entirely sure. I think Zach and I were just like, okay, let's play a game. We have a tennis ball, we have a frying pan. Oh, and we use a frying pan as a bat. That's
perfect.
I don't know why that's an element of the tradition because we do actually have bats on floor, but we always use a frying pan as the bat. And one night we just went, let's play a game. We'll figure out how it works, And it started with just batting practice, and then we just added tackling. And I don't know, people just really, really enjoyed that. So it's become something that we do on a once a month, once every 2 month basis. But Hall Ball is now a rallying cry that occurs from time to time. Whereas, there are plenty of other fun things that we've done some night or another, but just don't come back in that same sort of way.
It almost feels random sometimes which traditions stick and which ones don't. And especially the attempt at creating traditions, I think is something that, especially in maybe an academic environment, is something that a lot of times administration will try and do.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
They'll be like, we're going to do this awesome fun event and it'll become a long-standing tradition and everyone will love it. And there's a lot of good intention and a lot of effort and oftentimes a lot of money put into this sort of event. Especially at, cool schools like ours, where people like to throw parties for, lots and lots of money.
Rife Rager.
And actually that's very interesting. The Rife Rager versus the Kornbluth Carnival is a very interesting dichotomy.
Yeah.
For those not at MIT, our former president now, Raphael Reif, left this year. He stepped down and was replaced by the new president, Sally Kornbluth. So we had 2 parties to commemorate this, both of which must have been extremely expensive. There were a lot of jokes about a $1 million tent for the Kornbluth Carnival. But essentially, both the leaving and entering president threw parties, one in the fall to commemorate Reif's leaving, one in the spring to commemorate Kornbluth's arriving. The Rife Rager and the Kornbluth Carnival.
Neither of which were official names, at least not to my knowledge.
No, but Rife Rager has stuck pretty well.
Rife Rager has stuck very well, yeah.
And I'm an advocate of Kornbluth Carnival for at least alliterative-ish.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get good alliteration with K's.
Right. She really should have thought about that.
It's tough. It's tough.
It is tough, but even I feel like with those, I feel like Rye Fraser was a lot more popular.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think part of that might have just been, it was, part of that's the novelty, I suppose. And we hadn't really had any sort of Rye Fraser or equivalent because, well, I don't know, the idea of like the president or outgoing president in this case, throwing a party, it was new, it was exciting. Whereas, when it came time for the Corn Bluth Carnival, it was like, okay, well, but is it going to be as good as Rye Fraser? There was the point of comparison there.
And also, Rye Fraser was a very different vibe than Corn Bluth Carnival.
Absolutely. It was at night. It was various dance floors, parties going on. It was less of, it was a rager as opposed to a carnival.
Yeah, and I feel like the Corn Bluth Carnival also, it seemed a lot more family-oriented, which is great, but it would have been really fun for us if it was less family-oriented, because we were talking about, like, we would go to, like, the arcade part of things, which was cooler. They had a merry-go-round, and we were like, well, there were, like, 5-year-olds waiting in line for the merry-go-round. They should go. Whereas if it was just us,
then we could actually have fun doing it.
I would have been on the merry-go-round, Yeah,
I would have been playing at the arcade instead of waiting for families to... well, teach their children how to play the arcade games, which is all very well and good. And, I imagine a great moment for the family, but I was in line.
I remember that we kept saying after Rye Fraser, man, Rife should leave more often.
Yep. But I suppose going back to that idea of establishing traditions, I think one of the things when an institution tries to establish a tradition, there are so many different factors that go into play into whether or not it's established. And I guess, from an institutional standpoint, what that means is, well, sometimes you just have to keep trying even after it doesn't work the first couple of times, But I think also sometimes with some communities, there's an aspect of traditions where it's just like, these are ours. These are, how we represent ourselves. We don't want someone else to be instituting this for us.
Totally. I was literally thinking as you were saying that. I think that a lot of times it's hard to intentionally create traditions, and they're a lot more organic, and maybe that's part of the nature of culture, especially at a place like a college. Speaking of which, good after morning and welcome to On the Dome, a podcast about how non-expert college-age youth think. And today, with the long, very in-depth intro, we're actually talking about school culture and how it's created and preserved, which is something that we're both very interested in and something that MIT has a lot of. So do you want to introduce yourself for the very few listeners who haven't seen you before?
Hey, long time no see. I'm Liam. I've been on this podcast a couple of times before. I'm a sophomore, but this will probably be the last time I can say that. Going into my junior year here at MIT. And I live on Burton 3rd, the 3rd floor of Burton Connor, one of the dorms here on campus, we like to think that we have a lot of culture and, are quite good at spreading it to the rest of the campus.
Like a good tub of yogurt. Very cultured.
Yeah, you can say that.
And once it's there, you can tell it's been there.
Yeah, and maybe the rest of campus is milk or something, and we're spreading the culture to all of that.
Yeah. Great metaphor. Perfect. So tell us a little bit about the Burton 3rd lifestyle. So Burton 3rd is the 3rd floor of the Burton Connor dorm on the Burton side.
Yep. And
it has a separate sort of admission, sort of rooming process to the rest of the building. It's sort of its own living community within a community. Yes?
Yeah. So the different dorms here are, all set up in different ways. And Burton Connor is floor living, right? So each floor group has, different traditions, different practices, different vibes. There are quieter floors and louder floors. We are definitely one of the louder floors. So, after a student is placed into Burton Connor during REX, the residency exchange, we then have a floor exchange, which is a quite rushed process of about, 2 to 4 hours where new residents get tours and go to events of all of the various floors and see which ones match their vibe. So Some floors will, during Flex, have something like a pizza party where it's just get to know people, see if you like how things are going. We have a talent show where we basically just, incoming people arrive and we scream at them, "Talent!" And, you know, if it's something entertaining, then yes, people might have a very good time doing something like, well, one guy jumped really high, and it was actually quite impressive. He nearly hit the ceiling. But yeah, after they show their talent, then they just, you know, see what's going on floor, talk with people, have a good time. But yeah, each floor kind of acts as its own entity. Burton Connor government, for example, is made up of floor chairs, each of whom represent one floor. There's a whole voting system in place. It's all very complicated and legalese.
Is it proportional representation? Is it like electors?
Not exact. I mean, yeah. I guess it's a lot like the Electoral College, to be honest, because each floor is a different size, but each floor still only gets one voter.
Interesting.
I mean, there are also like you can have a dorm-wide referendum, and I don't think anyone takes dorm government too seriously, but. Then again, I didn't think anyone took UA government too seriously until about 4 weeks ago or so. So,
to contrast, Simmons is a pure democracy. Every week there's a house meeting. Anyone who shows up, or anyone in the dorm, has one vote. Everyone's vote is equal, and everything is passed by pure majority.
Yep.
Which is, yeah, it's funny how like even dorm to dorm, there's these little subcultures of even like how our government is run. Yeah. Is very different because it's all very like student like focused.
Absolutely.
Started.
And you know, I mean, the way Simmons is constructed, a floor style living arrangement wouldn't really work as well, right? I mean, the GRA sections in Simmons are, you know, just blocks of the building, right? Because well, only 2 or 3 of the floors are actually fully contiguous.
Yeah, the architecture itself is just like very non-conducive to the idea of one floor is a contained unit because, for example, the 10th floor is divided into 3 sections, none of which are accessible from the others.
Yeah, so it wouldn't really work so well. You know, you could have each subsection be something, B tower or 10B, but yeah, whereas
or penthouse as they prefer to be called.
The penthouse, yeah. So you know, it's a lot more centered around lounges or the smaller subunits. But yeah, with Burton Connor, it's each floor is its own entity almost. You know, there are specific traditions to each floor. We throw parties which are, you know, on one level supported by all of Burton Connor, but are really specifically Burton Third events. You know, like DTYD, Dance Till You Drop, is supported by all of Burton Connor, and the other floors will help us out in some aspects of planning, and we get a little bit of funding from the BC-wide budget. But it is very much first and foremost a Burton Third event, hence all of the orange decorations and whatnot. Whereas, you know, something like one of B1's parties, again, the rest of Burton Connor will support it, and Burton Third will show up and go, yeah, let's go B1, you got this. But it'll all be very blue instead, and the decoration will all be B1 themed.
And I think that of all of the floors, Burton Third is pretty well known around campus for some reasons.
There was a fun little diagram, an alignment chart, I suppose, that I saw going around, which listed various MIT dorms. I think it was on Jock.
It was Jock
to Nerd.
And then
Jock Prep.
Nerd Goth, I think, or Nerd Punk maybe.
Were Nerd and Goth opposite ends of the spectrum?
I think that Nerd and Jock were.
Jock, Nerd,
and then Prep
Goth. Yeah.
I also saw this chart.
Yeah. And I remember being pleasantly surprised that Burton Third was in one area, and the rest of Burton Connor was in a different area. So, you know, we got our own special little place on the chart.
No, that's pretty accurate. I think you guys were like Jock Goth.
Yeah, we were Jock Goth. We were like at the intersection of the Jock side and East Campus, which I was like, you know what?
Pretty accurate.
Yeah, I can see that, actually.
I think the whole chart was pretty accurate. Simmons was Actually, this is interesting. So Simmons was on the sort of prep nerd side, much more nerd than prep, but,
Yeah.
which is accurate. But I think it's interesting that you went from prep nerd dorm to jock goth dorm, because I do think that you have aspects of all four of those things.
I mean, yeah, we are at MIT, so
Yeah.
everyone will be nerd to some extent or another, right? No matter where you are. And yeah, it's not a binary thing. Those aspects do shine through in all sorts of scenarios, to be honest.
Yes, I think that you can, like, for you specifically, you can do it like prep Liam is like mock trial and speech and debate and Model UN. Nerd Liam is math camp Liam. And also like nuclear science major. Then jock Liam is Taekwondo, and the fact that now, I think for the third time on the podcast, you've talked about fighting people.
Hey, Hallball isn't fighting people. It's a sport.
Fighting people for sport.
Yeah, okay.
And then goth Liam, you just went to the emo party, right?
Emo night. Yeah, that was fun. That was very good fun. Still wish I had managed to get tickets to Era's tour, but emo night was a fun way to spend Saturday night, regardless.
Yes, someday we'll get there.
Someday.
But I think that, like, going back to what we were just talking about. Actually, not going back to what we were just talking about. From emo night,
Okay.
parties at MIT. I think that people don't expect MIT to throw the kind of parties that MIT does.
It's really interesting, yeah, because I remember even before I got here, seeing just this post on Instagram floating around of like what colleges in each state have the best parties, and being a little confused that MIT was the
did we
college
win the
from
state?
Massachusetts. Yeah, I mean, and it was
Accurate, okay.
It was
I
just
would buy that.
I mean, I believe it based on how often I see people from other schools coming here to
Yeah.
things. But it was like, to little old me who hadn't arrived here yet, I was a little confused, and it's just some random Instagram account's opinion. There was no sourcing of where they got this data from. A very unprofessional study. But since I've been here, it's been like, okay, yeah, we work hard, play hard. That's, in my opinion, one of the unofficial mottos of this place.
Absolutely. I love to, like, I was joking with my mom. She was laughing at me, actually, because the weekend before my last, like, batch of midterms, I ended up going to 6 parties that weekend. And
that's a lot, even by my standards.
I'm
Wow.
pretty sure you were there at 4, if not 5 of them.
Wait, which weekend was this?
This was the weekend of, it was Article 2 and St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, that'll do you.
And
that'll
we went
do you.
to the cone party at Ellery's Frat.
Right, because we had to support the cones.
And we preceded both Article 2 and the cones with parties on different floors in Burton, Connor.
Yes, because Connor 3 was having an event.
For St. Patrick's Day, I think?
Yeah, because St. Patrick's Day was near, and they're the Irish floor. Again, another example of how, the different floors have. Connor 3 is the Irish floor, Connor 2 is the British floor. There's a little bit of back and forth between them because, well,
History.
Ireland, Britain, yeah, a little bit of history. But yeah, so yeah, that was a few parties in that one night.
I think the only one that it was Friday and Saturday, I think, because it was also St. Patrick's Day, so there was a lot happening.
Oh, yeah.
I think the only one you weren't at was the 21st birthday party that I had gone to.
I don't believe I was there, no, yeah.
But yeah, that was a fun weekend, and it was certainly not something that I had expected coming into MIT to be going to parties. I was just like, are there parties at MIT? Who knows?
Much less 6 in one weekend.
But then you get here, and during orientation, East Campus throws their famed roller coaster party. I don't know if that's what it's called, but
yeah, I never actually get the name right. It's East Side Festival sometimes. I think the name sometimes changes. Sometimes it's just East Campus Party. Sometimes East Side Festival. But yeah, that's a tradition that I am very happy is around and hope that they can keep during renovations.
Absolutely. So basically what East Campus does, it's one of the bigger dorms on campus, and it's actually in the middle of campus, as opposed to all the other dorms, which are off campus in some regard.
Yep.
Off of main campus.
Either West or random.
Either West or random. And East Campus, for the orientation party when all the freshmen have come here for the first time, in their lawn, they build a full working roller coaster.
Well, it depends year by year. Some years it's a roller coaster. Some years it's like there's a gyroscope and some other really weird spinny things. I think next year there's going to be a much larger castle and a climbing wall. But regardless of what it is specifically, it's very impressive.
Yes. They build essentially a giant activity thing out of wood and ambition.
Yeah.
And it's I've heard like it's certified by like the Cambridge like city. Like they allow people to go on it, like they test it and everything.
Yep. I mean, because if they didn't get the certification, MIT would not be letting them do that.
But I mean, we have enough mechanical engineers here. We can and then they just strap pre-fresh in and they go around a gyroscope or a roller coaster.
Yeah. I think one of my friends is actually leading the build project for next year.
Oh, wow.
But, you know, it's interesting because next year EC is being renovated, right? So everyone's had to move out. They're knocking the whole thing down. And when a dorm is renovated, it's a lot harder to keep the cultures and traditions flowing. I mean, Burton Connor was just renovated, which is one of the reasons I wasn't there last year, right? I also liked Simmons a lot. It was good to live there. But so I'm really curious to see how well EC can manage to keep things going. And I hope it's very well because they've got some excellent traditions.
Absolutely. Some of the more well-known parties, such as like Article 2, Mardi Gras, obviously the roller coaster one we just mentioned, Fred Fest, all East Campus staples.
Yep.
So hopefully all of them will continue. But going back to what you just said, so Burton Connor was just renovated. And that has definitely had an impact on how Burton Connor, and specifically the Bombers, have operated.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so we're a living group, which means, and we're part of the larger Burton Connor entity. So the people that live on Burton 3rd are people who one way or another end up on Burton Connor, and then during Flex choose the floor. And normally that means, you know, we get our new incoming class at the beginning of the year and do our best to welcome them and introduce them and absorb them into the community, and then, you know, start getting closer as a floor and as a community from the very start. And, you know, we're a very tight-knit community. It's about 60 people in total, 58 right now, I think, spread out through 8 suites on floor. But, you know, you can go to pretty much any other suite and just say hi to people if you're bored. There's a lot of spontaneity. I mean, people play hall ball at 2 a.m. It's a very fun time. But during renovations, there wasn't really a floor to speak of. So, you know, it's a lot harder to keep that same sense of closeness, that same tight-knit community when, one, you're not all living in the same place, and two, you don't you're trying to tell people, hey, you should come live in this dorm that's currently being renovated, but it's going to be back in a couple of years and it'll be great. Trust us. So first off, so we're the 25s. We're the currently sophomore group. The 24s were the year before us. The 23rds the year before that. And, you know, the 24 class right now is only 11 people. And, you know, if you look 11 times 4, that's 44. That's a lot less than the 58 people we have in total. And a major reason for that is just, you know, the combination of COVID and renovations meant it was a lot harder to keep things going, to keep traditions flowing, to pass down culture. Because, well, you had to kind of be proactively searching to really make those connections rather than just being put into this community. And then, of course, without actually having a dorm to speak of, it's a lot harder to do major events that are hallmarks and staples. There's for one, you don't have an official budget anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There's no dorm budget supporting events, which means if you are going to try and do something, there's a lot more fundraising. There's a lot more thought that has to go into, wait, how exactly are we paying for this? What's the plan?
Mm-hmm.
For two, you don't have a place to do things as much. I mean, last year we threw ABC and DTYD in Walker Memorial, which is also where I took some of my exams. So that was a strange dichotomy.
Mm-hmm. Man, I really hate Walker.
Yeah, it's so the thing about Walker for me is I am so confused by how many uses it has. There is a climbing gym in Walker Memorial.
Oh yeah, that's where the bouldering is.
Yes, it's tiny and it's not that great, but what?
There's also, that's where we get our flu shots every year.
Yep. There's the Dance Dance Revolution in the basement.
Sorry?
There's a Dance Dance Revolution room in the basement.
Just for Dance Dance Revolution.
I think so.
And then the top floor is where everyone miserably takes their exams. And I swear to God, the reason that I don't like Walker for exams is because the way that the sound travels in that third floor, it sounds like you're underwater. So like the person at the front of the room can be yelling to tell you something important about your test, and it doesn't sound like English.
Yep. We had quantum there just last Friday basically, and every announcement had to be done twice because first it had to be done to this side of the room and then it had to be done to the other side of the room. And it was just like, you lose a little bit of time looking over and wondering what the announcement is. And it turned out that for one of them, it was, you don't have to do this thing that I had just done in one of the questions. So I was like, oh, okay. Thanks for telling me now. That's great. Mm-hmm. Cheers. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, so Walker Memorial, strange place.
Yeah, and I think that it was a challenge for, it's a challenge anytime any building is renovated when the buildings have so much culture. Another challenge is the way that the building operates in the future, which can sometimes change. So, we can talk about either pricing or the murals thing, both of which are...
Yeah, no, both of which are significant things.
Yeah.
So I suppose starting with pricing, because there's not too much I want to go into there beyond just complaining, I suppose. But with pricing, MIT has its various tiers of housing costs, tier 1 being most expensive, tier 3 being least expensive. Burton Connor before renovations, and don't get me wrong, it absolutely needed to be renovated. It's sucked that means that people couldn't live there, but same as EC, it does need to be renovated. There are issues. Tier 3 is a lot cheaper. It's more affordable for people. Now, post renovations, Burton Connor was upgraded to a tier 1 dorm. Mm-hmm. The renovations, I imagine on the whole, were an improvement. I didn't actually live there before renovations because it's before our time. But I do not think that the post renovation dorm should be tier 1 pricing. Mm-hmm. And part of that is, it's annoying on a personal level because it means that, some people just can't really be in Burton Connor because it's more expensive and it's not within their means to go to the more expensive dorm, so they look for cheaper living options. One of our 24s, the part of the reason he decided not to come back was because it was cheaper not to. Mm-hmm. But then we also have the fact that, there are still a lot of things going on in the dorm that really don't feel like it fits the status of tier 1, to the extent that, there was a huge petition last semester and a lot of just kind of public unrest, how would one put it? Because it felt like either A, the renovations weren't really finished, or B, the renovations weren't worthy of tier 1 status in the first place. There's a whole laundry list of complaints, but perhaps the biggest ones are that, there was lead on the windows and asbestos in the walls. And
After renovations.
After renovations, yes. And look, so, and the reason that there's still asbestos in the walls is because HRS is working on a budget, and it would cost well beyond what they have available to them to be able to completely de-asbestosify the walls, or so I'm told. And it's all encapsulated, or so I'm told, and should be fine so long as no holes are made in the walls. Unfortunately, the walls are rather flimsy. Like, there are walls where if you push on them, they bend inwards, and I don't know too much about building, but I don't think walls are supposed to do that. One of my...
You want to check that one?
Yep, it's not bending inwards. It's...
This is a building often inhabited by the architecture department. I'm really proud of them.
You know, it is worth noting, just as a complete side note and tangent, that one thing I've noticed is that buildings designed for specific departments, it's this fun little pattern where sometimes they aren't very good at what that department is. It's almost as if, like, yes, it was made for this department, and thus this department didn't exist to help make it. Like back home at the University of Sydney, the architecture building looks awful, and the engineering building always has engineering problems. Like, I mean, the bathrooms flood on a bi-monthly basis, basically. But yeah, so going back to the walls and the housing prices issue. Well, so okay. The walls are a little flimsy, but that's all well and good so long as they don't actually break. Unfortunately, they broke. One of my friends, for example, just got onto his bed and went through the wall when he tried to just get into bed. And that's not great. Another one of my friends was leaning on the wall, and then it just went through. So there's a lot of concern, I suppose, that that this is going to be tier 1 pricing despite all of these things going on.
And also, so East Campus is getting renovated right now.
Yep.
I believe it was also previously tier 3.
Yep.
After the renovations, it'll be tier 1,
yep.
Meaning that there will only be one tier 3 dorm, which is Random, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is the smallest dorm.
Yeah.
If not the smallest,
Probably.
one of the smallest.
Yeah, no, I believe that.
Tiny. And it's also far from campuses. It's a very specific culture.
Yeah.
And so it just really dramatically lessens the more affordable options for housing.
Oh, absolutely.
In addition to the fact that all housing costs have been increased because we right now at MIT have something of a housing crisis.
That we do. And, renovations are necessary, but they aren't helping matters either, because if a dorm is being renovated, people cannot really live there. So
very, very true.
A little bit more of a housing crisis.
Yes, but
good luck, EC in exile.
And definitely all of these sort of more administrative, logistic aspects very much influence culture. More directly, another thing is after these dorms have been renovated, sometimes they have changes to what you are allowed to do in or to those dorms, bringing up the muraling issue.
So a big issue is that Burton Connor has had a tradition of, being artsy and fun to live in. People will paint murals and make the place theirs and decorate. And post-renovation, the muraling policy has been, well, in short, don't. That's maybe unfair. There have been canvases put up which people can decorate. There have been intermediate steps and things like that. But people kind of just want the ability to just directly paint on the walls. And it's really been an interesting negotiation and back and forth when it comes to sort of reconciling the interests of the groups in these sorts of things. Like, all of the floors, despite being different communities and different in the specific ways that they want it, are pretty pro-muraling. Like, there are group chats kind of organizing what's going on, and they have representatives from pretty much every floor. Mm-hmm. And
as well as people who don't even live in Burton Connor. There's a lot of outside support.
Because, Burton Connor was just renovated. EC is being renovated right now. EC currently, pre-renovations, is very, very muraling free. Draw whatever you want. There's fantastic decorations. One of my friends,
best art.
Yeah, their room is incredibly decorated, just all over. But so if post-renovation Burton Connor is unable to mural, that kind of sets a precedent for post-renovation East Campus or other dorms who might be interested in artistic expression, basically.
And even though most other dorms don't mural, at least currently, Simmons has a culture of chalk art on the walls.
Yep.
And other dorms have, every dorm has their own way that they make their space their own.
Yeah.
And the idea that, I think that one of the things I've heard from administration about, the language being used on why that this is sort of a new policy is the idea of inclusion. We want to be inclusive to everybody, and so no murals. But I think I had written in that form that was sent out is that we need to reject the idea that homogeneity is inclusivity. You can't whitewash our community, so don't whitewash our walls.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a very, personal, very MIT, method of expression. It's, large scale, it's artistic, it's creative, and very collaborative as well.
Yeah, no, I agree on all of those fronts. And, it is interesting kind of delineating the differences between the compromise options and, why something like just canvases or weird attachable wall thing, although in Burton Connor we can't really have the weird attachable wall things as much because, there's asbestos in the actual walls, so it's a lot harder to drill, but that's a whole separate combo with HRS. But, there is that sense of okay, just let us draw things, we want the freedom to be able to express the space how we want to. And, if there are really concerns about, let's say, summer residents or something like that, we cover up the walls or something, but just let us do stuff.
Yeah, I think that it's really important that, and I think MIT in general is very, as a community, I think that MIT has a huge mutual respect between administration, faculty, staff, and students, where it's sort of everyone, is involved in all the conversations. There's a really great, mutual respect and camaraderie for, the intelligence of everybody and, the, respect for everyone's wishes and desires. And that being said, I think that it's really important that MIT, supports student culture because it's one of, I think, the best parts about MIT. It's one of the things that makes it more than just, a place that you go to learn about a certain subject. It makes it a community.
Yeah, I guess touching on that, I suppose, one of the things that I like to try and do when looking at all these culture issues is try and see what the administration perspective is. Because a lot of the clashes that have been going on have been, administration being less supportive in one way or another of some cultural tradition. So, for example, hacking has been, there have been some difficulties with how much support there's been. And what I find really interesting is that, as you said, it's part of what makes MIT such a good experience and is advertised by MIT.
Even in the graduation speeches, I'm sure that Sally Kornbluth, whenever she's making her speech at commencement, is going to talk about aspects of the MIT community, such as, the culture.
Yeah. And it's, of course, it's interesting to me to look at aspects of culture and be yes, these are really good to the MIT experience. Can we have them supported a little more? Because sometimes it feels like there's a little bit of a disconnect between the version of MIT that's being presented, where these cultural traditions and things are very heavily supported, and some aspects of them in practice with places with counterculture dorms like Senior House in Bexley being shut down, with what feels like a little bit of a lack of support towards aspects of things in Burton Connor and East Campus, and just it'll be really interesting to see how things develop.
Mm-hmm.
There are a bunch of people on floor who have the history and the stories collated a lot better than I do, but there's going to be a lot of stuff going forward.
Right. I mean, even in dorms without the I think that Burton Connor and specifically Burton Third, very outspoken, very well-known culture. Same thing with East Campus. But even dorms such as Simmons and other, more traditional, I guess, dorms, there is a lot of culture that I think has potentially been lost over COVID.
Yeah.
Well, not fully lost yet, because we still have seniors here who know what it was like before.
Yeah.
And remember the different traditions and aspects of things. So, for example, I was talking to a senior in Simmons, and I learned that Simmons previously had a Yule Ball every year. And Simmons has a sort of light Harry Potter theming throughout. And it's interesting because we would never have known that. And, if that person had graduated and, hadn't told anyone, it's very possible that within even a year or two, no one would have remembered, and that would have been that tradition completely done with. It's still not currently active, but at least the idea of learning from people who came before you and being another passer down, recipient of what the culture was, sort of what's the word, someone who carries things through history.
Custodian?
Sure, custodian of history, is one of the ways that maybe some things can be brought back, and culture.
Oh, steward.
Steward, sure. Yeah, that's like a steward of, tradition, culture.
I'm still
flight
thinking
attendant.
of words. But no, I agree with you there. It is very interesting, and the effect that COVID especially had can't really be understated because, what I was saying about not being not being able to live together applies much more broadly than Burton Third, because nobody was, you had your tiny pods during COVID, which was, I can't even imagine what that sort of experience was like.
Right, and there wasn't an option,
Yeah, I mean, the option was basically just have a very, very small social circle or take a gap year.
Mm-hmm.
And
a lot of people chose the gap year.
Which makes sense. I would have as well. I'm happy we managed to be back on campus by the time we returned, because that would have been much less fun.
Absolutely, and I think that you can even see in the 24 class, there's a little bit of I don't know. I don't want to make broad generalizations about the class, but I have noticed that there seems to be a difference in the 24 class versus maybe the 23s and the 25s, where, I don't know, maybe you could attribute some of that to, they didn't have a freshman year, and I just think about how much bonding, how much, class camaraderie that was built in our freshman year, and just imagining starting from scratch this year, I don't know, I think it would really affect, a class.
But, in turn, there is actually a very strange kind of effect on Burton Third specifically, where the 24s, basically went through COVID and were a really small class, and kind of all they had were each other, right? Mm-hmm. So it was okay, they bonded. They're small class, but they got stuck together. Mm-hmm. Whereas the 25s, we still weren't living on floor, right, because of renovations. But we were back on campus during freshman year. And as you said, we were doing bonding with all sorts of different things. But what that meant is that, right now, the 25s on Burton Third are a very large class. We're 17 people, I want to say. And we kind of joined in dribs and drabs over the course of the entire year, which meant that we were a lot less cohesive than the other classes because, you know, we've got attachments to many other places, strings pulling us all over the place from outside the floor. And we also just, like, didn't really do, as an entire class, a bunch of the, you know, freshman bonding activities that are sort of traditions of the floor that we normally have for freshman classes to bond. So, for example, there's camping trip, which is done early fall semester, and it's got to be early because it gets cold here, so you don't want to camp in November or something like that. And you know, it's organized by the sophomores of that year, and it's the entire freshman class, or as much of them as you can convince to go, which you try and get pretty much everyone, unless there's some sort of clash, and people will hopefully reschedule those. Go on a camping trip to the woods in the middle of nowhere, and everyone, you know, sleeps in tents and, you know, gets to know each other, and it's a fun time. But camping trip last year happened when I think only 4 25s had actually gone, yeah, I'm going to be in Burton 3rd next year. So there was a lot less of a freshman class to actually bond at that point. I mean, I wasn't a bomber at that point. It was just like 4 people or so. So we never really had that entire cohesive class nature. And we're still trying to get it. One of these days, we're actually going to succeed at having our 25 bonding events, you know, breakfast trips and yada yada. But we'll get there.
Yeah. And I think that, honestly, throughout this whole conversation, I've been, like, trying to keep track of themes and all of that. And at the beginning, we were saying how oftentimes administration might try and create culture where there isn't any. And sometimes it works, but often it doesn't succeed unless there's also sort of student support and organically, you know, some sort of organicness to it. Leading to the idea that maybe, like, culture and traditions can't really be actively creative, but as we've sort of talked about, they do have to be actively maintained.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, maintenance is one of the really, if you want a culture or tradition to die, just stop it from being maintained. I guess, you know, if we bring physics into this, it's inertia, right? A culture at rest remains at rest unless acted upon, which is why it's so hard to start a new tradition. But if it stops being maintained, then it's gone, right? You need to keep it going.
Keep your momentum.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I think that's a pretty good observation. And COVID provided such a natural interruption to a lot of traditions that, there's a lot of work to be done trying to pick up the pieces and put them back together.
And I mean, obviously, cultures can't always stay the same. They have to sort of evolve with the time. I mean, certainly there are traditions in, you know, history and even probably in schools that definitely are not things that we would want to do now. But I think that evolution is not the same as erasure. And hopefully, with administration's support in the maintenance process and students' freedom for the sort of organic creation process, we can continue to be a very cultured, very fun place.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a good hope. Although, to me, it is very interesting on a wider scale because, like, on a societal level, I'm not a fan of tradition. Like, I think that the argument that doing something is good because tradition, I hate that argument. I think tradition is so often used as, like, just an excuse for things that actually don't make sense. But
as long as it's fun.
As long as it's fun tradition, you know, I love having little quirks and traditions on a smaller level, on just a living room cultural expression type things.
Let's keep MIT fun.
Keep MIT fun.
And on that note, thank you so much for listening for our last episode of the year, which you also were on the last episode of last year.
I returned.
Thank you so much for listening, and this has been On the Dome.
All right.
All right.
50 minutes
Yes.
of recording.
Absolutely. And now